Welcome, everyone, to the Global Mindfulness in Education Summit. My name is Helen Maffini, and with my co-host, Chris Willard, we've put on this summit so we can learn about what's happening globally in the field of mindfulness and how different countries and cultures are bringing mindfulness to schools and to children and teenagers around the world. And I'm really excited today to introduce you to Grant Rix. He's coming to us from New Zealand today, and he is a mindfulness leader. He does a lot of mindfulness training, delivery, and research in the field, and he has created a program while he was working with Mental Health Foundation of New Zealand, which is an evidence-based program, and it's been implemented in over 300 schools across New Zealand, which is amazing. It's called Pause, Breathe, Smile, and he's going to tell us a little bit about that today and how the New Zealand culture has been integrated into the training and program. So thank you so much for joining us, Grant, and welcome.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Great. And I just wanted to mention before we start off, Grant's given us a page that has lots of great videos, downloads, and different materials to help teachers and schools bring mindfulness into the classroom and into your personal life. So we'll have the link for that below this video so you can get more information about what they're doing in New Zealand. So Grant, tell us a little bit about how you came into this field, what your experiences have been with mindfulness personally.
Okay, so I started practicing mindfulness when I think it was about 21 or 22. And as a young man, as a teenager and a young man, I experienced a lot of anxiety. Quite debilitating forms of anxiety, particularly social anxiety, which is, fairly common.
Yeah.
And I also had, kind of a great curiosity about the mind. What is this thing or this process, this lens through which we perceive all of our life experience? And, the kind of realization that I didn't really know much about it. And I certainly didn't know how I got caught in these patterns of dysfunction. And I didn't have any strategies for helping me to notice that and, live in a way that was just much more satisfying and fulfilling rather than getting caught in these patterns of distress. So I guess those were the kind of two driving factors, was curiosity and anxiety, which kind of complete opposites of each other.
Yeah.
But I went straight into retreat, just through a series of kind of fortuitous meetings, I suppose. Ended up in a retreat with a teacher who I continued to study with for, a long time. And that really launched the kind of path of personal inquiry into mindfulness training and practice. And that defined my entire 20s. It's defined my whole life, but, that was basically the career, if you like, was study and practice and retreat work and being involved in long-term programs around this. And then I suppose professionally, doing my undergrad degree in psychology, then getting into health promotion, and eventually moving into mental health promotion with the Mental Health Foundation here in New Zealand. And they were far more interested in my mindfulness training background than my health promotion experience when I started there, because, that was, I think, 2010. And at that point, as I understand it, mindfulness was the fastest growing area of mind science research.
Right.
And the Mental Health Foundation here in New Zealand, it's not just about helping people to manage mental distress. It's also about looking at how we can support people to flourish in life. So, very much the positive psychology side coming into things there too. So, and that's where it started. That's where Pause, Breathe, Smile started.
Right.
Was at the Mental Health Foundation. Really, I guess, we were very interested in early intervention programs to help children manage the normal ups and downs of life, to protect as a buffer, or to act as a buffer to prevent the onset of, future mental health issues, and really help children to thrive and not just survive, essentially. So I looked around, what was happening internationally. I wrote a paper, it was basically a literature review, and then made 4 recommendations around what I thought we should do here in New Zealand. And that was to, develop something local. And I had a personal interest in doing that because of, my own training and wanting to honour that and bring some of that in, but also to acknowledge our cultural context here in New Zealand, and the education curriculum as well, to make sure that we were really aligning well with that. So that was sort of the first recommendation, was to create something local and then go and test it out. Let's research it, make sure it works. As we develop it, this was the second recommendation, we need to use bicultural models of health so that we're really honouring the Indigenous Māori people and their understanding of health and well-being. And if, this worked, if the research shows that it worked, then let's start training teachers for long-term sustainability. And so that was the third recommendation. And then the fourth one was to support kaupapa Māori approaches to mindfulness, which means approaches to mindfulness training and practice that are developed by Māori for Māori. So it was really just about, opening a space in which that conversation could take place and something could kind of arise out of that. Yeah, so that was the paper, that was the 4 recommendations. And then we managed to get some funding. And so I had, this great period of time where I could just write a program. I did actually the Still Quiet Place online training with Amy Saltzman to get a sense of, learning what was happening out there and learning from someone who had been doing this in schools for quite a long time. And that was fantastic. And so, and then, and just studying other things, and set about writing this program. And then we went out and we tested it. So Pause, Breathe, Smile is an 8-session mindfulness program, good old 8-session model. It just worked out that way. I didn't plan it to be 8 sessions, but when all the material went down in there, it was like, oh, look at that. Yeah. So 8 sessions. And, it's covering off most of the basics that you cover off in mindfulness programs. What I thought was kind of missing in my searches around the world that I wanted to bring in was a clear focus on interconnectedness with the natural world as well. So we've got a whole lesson around that. And then the whole program is contextualized by a model of holistic well-being, which is called Te Whare Tapawha, which translates as the house with 4 walls. And each of those 4 walls represents a different domain of well-being. And it's very kind of, it's very universally applicable, as you'll understand when I describe these walls. But is, importantly, really appropriate and speaks to Māori and what health and well-being means for Indigenous Māori people here. So those 4 walls are taha tinana, which is the body, the physical well-being, taha hinangaro, which means mental and emotional well-being, taha whānau, which is social well-being, and then taha wairoa, which is spiritual well-being. And the idea really is that if, we neglect to attend to one of those 4 domains represented by the walls, then the integrity of the whare, the house, is going to be undermined. And so it's about attending to those 4 domains, but also seeing the interconnectedness between them. And inherently in this model as well, particularly under taha wairoa, spiritual well-being, is an acknowledgement of the importance of place and environment, and recognizing our interconnectedness with the natural world. So that comes through in that model inherently. So this model, it contextualizes the whole program. So essentially, as we go through the program, what we're becoming mindful of is, these 4 domains represented by the walls of the house, and making sure that we're really looking to, build well-being in those areas, which fits nicely with traditional mindfulness practice too. And the thing there too, I think, which was really important coming through, was in this age of secular mindfulness practice, which is, absolutely fundamentally important. I think we need to recognize, certainly down here, that secular doesn't mean not honoring the spiritual side of this. And so for Māori, if you're not talking about spiritual well-being, you're not even talking about well-being, just the conversation stops there. It's like, if that's not part of it, then what are we talking about? Right. So that had to be there, and it gives a kind of a sort of a bit of a mandate to really honor the mystery and the, honor things like connection to ancestors, connection to place, connection to culture, and how they shape our values, our attitudes, our beliefs, the way we see the world. And all of that's really important for helping our children, our young people to flourish through a program like this.
Yeah, wow, that sounds amazing, and I love the how culturally integrated it is, and very thoughtful approach. It sounds like, and the 4 walls and the interconnectedness, I think, will resonate with a lot of people watching. So, Grant, tell us a little bit about. So you developed this program, you did some research. What were some of the challenges that you faced kind of bringing it into the wider school system?
Early on, we had some challenges coming from small segments of the community, and just in certain communities, they were holding, quite strong sort of fundamentalist religious views. Yeah. And so, that's not too dissimilar to some of the challenges faced elsewhere in the Western world. So, but it kind of worked out quite well, because that was very early on in the very initial stages. And of course, the media picked it up, and New Zealand being a small place, it's sort of, if it's in the media in one place and it's sensational enough, it's going to be everywhere. But what it meant was that we had this really informal public opinion poll that started running, because people were making comments on, what the school, it was centered around one school who wanted to implement our program, and getting the, the pushback from a segment of their community. And the school stood firm, and they went, they implemented the program. They're still going and seeing good results. But because it made it into the media and people had the opportunity to comment on it, we got this really informal public opinion poll happening, and we found that actually, the majority of people out there really wanted these types of initiatives to be happening in schools. And that was really great to see, even though it was a challenging time for me and for the school. But they stood firm, as I said, and they went for it. So that was quite a big challenge, and thankfully, things seem to have calmed down quite a lot on that front over the years. I mean, that was in 2014, and things have only ramped up since then. Yeah. So it's pretty well accepted now. The other challenge, which is the far bigger, more concerning challenge for me is funding.
Right.
Always the question of funding, how you fund these things. But there's some positive signs happening there too. So,
yeah.
We made it through this far, and I think, it's only going to get easier from here on in.
Yeah. Everyone around the world says funding is the challenge. So
Yes.
A lot of work to be done there, but hopefully the funding support will come as these programs and research develop. And it's great to hear, that so many parents or people in the community were supportive of these types of programs. So that's really encouraging. So tell us a little bit about, I know you've done a lot of research with your program. So tell us about some of the highlights of the research, or what the research has found with the Pause, Breathe, Smile program.
Okay, so we did, very early on, we engaged in 3 formal studies. So our initial pilot study in 2013, that involved 5 primary schools. And we did a small qualitative study, really. We teachers' observations throughout the 8 weeks and a thematic analysis to see what emerged. And the themes that were emerging through that study were things like increased calm, increased focus and attention, enhanced self-awareness, improvements in conflict resolution skills, which was a really great finding, because we don't address conflict and how to resolve it in the program. It's not part of it.
Right.
But of course, we're focused on enhancing self-awareness, big focus on self-regulation and emotional regulation, and caring not just for ourselves, but for others as well. So, I think all of those different ingredients and areas of focus coming together really helped to achieve this outcome, or see this theme of improved conflict resolution skills. And we're in some pretty gnarly schools too, where they were having major issues with conflict. So it's quite a game changer for the teachers to see, that children who regularly get into conflicts are capable of resolving those conflicts without adult intervention, once they have skills and strategies to really take ownership over their own kind of a mental, emotional state. So that was a great finding. And we also found themes that emerged through there were kind of indications of increased pro-social behaviour, and reductions in teacher stress came through quite strongly, which was great, because at that stage we weren't training teachers, we were just going in and delivering it to children in the class. But we had a line in the sand that if you're an adult and you're in the room, you're a participant. You can't go off and mark or do something else. You had to be a part of it. And teachers got a lot of benefit just through going through that process alongside their young learners. So that was the first study. The second study was a mixed method study. We wanted to see if we could replicate those findings, but we added in some quantitative measures, looking at childhood well-being and its relationship to any increase in mindfulness. So we used a couple of scales to find that out. And what we found was, by and large, we replicated those themes from the qualitative side, and then the quantitative measures showed significant increases in well-being that were related to significant increases in mindfulness. And so that was measured pre, post, and then 3 months later. And in that study, we saw those gains happen at the, immediately after the program, but they dropped away again at the 3-month point, which is different to our third study. So the third one was a randomized controlled study, and we had one classroom in a school going through the Pause, Breathe, Smile program, same time, same day, conditions controlled as much as we could. Another class of same age children going through an emotional literacy program, so an active control group. And what we found, we used those same quantitative measures around well-being and mindfulness. We found that statistically significant increases again in well-being related to significant increases in mindfulness. And that was, we only, basically the changes were greater in a nutshell for the mindfulness group. And then those results were sustained 3 months later.
Wow.
When we went back, the follow-up point. And we speculate that the main reason was because in that school, where we saw those results sustained, they were maintaining daily practice after the program had finished.
Right. So, Grant, the program is teachers teach it for 8 weeks. For
yes.
How many times a week is it? Or
okay, so each lesson is about an hour long.
Okay.
And we encourage them to run that for 1 hour each week over 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And then between the lessons, keeping up with daily practice.
Yeah.
And we have guided audio tracks and, resources to support them to keep up with that daily practice. And then we talk about that being, really laying the foundation of understanding so that, the different techniques and practices, like the mindful breathing, the mindful movements and so on, are contextualized within this structured pathway where, each lesson scaffolds off the last and into the next, so that it all starts to make sense for the learners and for the teachers. There's a commitment over the long term. So really trying to move away from the idea of mindfulness as a technique. That you can just, cherry pick here and there, and may have, some success, but not as much as you could if you focus on building mindfulness as a competency, which, as we know, is going to take time. Yeah. And it has to be unpacked, it has to really be unpacked to make sense. So we talk about that as laying the foundation for understanding, and then beyond that, moving into the integration phase. And so we have a process where, schools reflect back on what they've done and choose aspects that they're going to continue with. And also, that's the point where you can maybe cherry pick a little bit more because you've got understanding, you've got a flow on, you can work with other resources. And then we do our best to try and create new stuff that we can feed through to schools as well.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think some of those audios are on the free resources link that you've given us. Yeah,
that's right. It's a small kind of selection there of some of the ones we do in class.
Yeah, wow, sounds really exciting and promising, and I love the fact that students were learning to resolve conflict. That's such an important skill. Without it being explicit in the program, that's a great finding. So tell us a little bit about the journey then, from going from these 5 schools, and then how have 300 schools ended up implementing this program?
Yeah, well, I mean, in a way, it really took on a life of its own. Okay. It really helped, that we were doing this from within the Mental Health Foundation. Yeah. Because, that's sort of the most recognisable voice in mental health in New Zealand. It's the Mental Health Foundation. So that was good, and that helped schools feel a sense of safety because, it's a very easy sell when you go to schools and say, look, I've got this program and these are the results we're getting. And, principals basically saying, when can you come in? Because they're seeing such an increase in anxiety. And, early on speaking with principals who've been in the game for, decades and saying that, over the past sort of 5 to 10 years, I've seen more kids entering school, at 5 years old with anxiety issues that they've never experienced before in all their years of teaching. So, anything that was going to help them to address that pain point they were into. So it was relatively easy sell. And then I think one of the big keys was building relationships, and building relationships with, groups and organizations that were already active within schools, and getting alongside them and working with them and you know, using that as a channel into schools. And then just doing, you know, whatever marketing we could with whatever budget we have.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. But the research, I think the research too,
Yeah.
that really,
Very important, yeah.
you know, again, that's where schools felt safe. They could see the research, they could see actually this has benefit. Oh, and then finally, the last thing was we were on a TV series just over a year or so ago, where you know, the presenter there, who's quite a famous guy in New Zealand, who's a psychologist and you know, does these interesting documentary style series, and this one was called The Curious Mind. So it's looking at the latest advances in neuroscience and, you know, and the issues people face and all of this, and they ended with looking at mindfulness. So they went into one of our schools and you know, watched the kids go through a lesson with their teacher, and they interviewed the principal, they interviewed me. And because Nigel Latter, who is the presenter there, is, you know, is a well-respected guy in New Zealand and has a way of speaking really well to, you know, the mums and dads of New Zealand, that really helped, you know, push things along. And he's still a big supporter as well of the program, and
Yeah, wonderful. It's great when you get those kind of opportunities to help really show what programs are doing and let people know, get more information, and just be aware, right? So, so what do you think are the opportunities coming up, you know, in New Zealand in the next 5 to 10 years in this field? Are you, obviously you'll hopefully get more and more schools on board, but do you see any other developments that you would like to see happening in the country?
Well, I think what we're really going to focus on is building capacity to, you know, to meet the demand from schools, but not just to train lots of new schools. I mean, we will do that, but to actually, you know, deepen the relationship with the schools that we've already trained, and really get alongside them and, you know, learn about what's really going well, what the challenges are, you know, all of those questions, and use that to really refine things moving forward and to develop new resources and to see if we can take this beyond being just an 8-week program to actually really truly integrated within everyday life in the school classroom. So I think that's, you know, that's the biggest area of focus. We've got a little bit more research lined up that we will do. And this, that's, I got something on the tip of my tongue, which is waiting to come out, which is just sort of shuffled into the back room of my brain right now. So it'll come
What
back.
What about you know, working with teachers who are people who are studying to be teachers in university?
Oh yeah, that would be great. And we've got a few connections there. But that could be, I think that's sort of more long term. We'll just see how that goes.
Right.
You know, the first step is to get the funding to make it free for schools. Deepen those relationships, you know, walk alongside them, and then continue building those relationships as best we can with universities.
And just going back to the beginning when you talked about how you integrated all these traditions from the Maori culture, how has that been accepted, or what have people from that culture said about the program and how it's integrated all these different elements?
Well, it's using the model Te Whare Tapawhā means that immediately it's going to be accepted, because that's a very well-established model within health and education. So there wasn't anything particularly radical. It was just about really honouring that. But what has happened since is, like all of our resources, for instance, are translated into Te Reo Māori, which is the Māori language. But the people who translated them too have been translating from a kind of Māori worldview. So that's the lens they've used. And that, I think, is something really important that we often forget, is to consider the worldview we bring when we approach these practices, and how that really shapes our understanding. It's really important to kind of challenge that view by taking other stances to see actually how does this look from another perspective, or from another cultural perspective. So they're doing it from a Te Ao Māori lens, a Māori worldview, and it's kind of helped lead to all sorts of interesting sort of spin-offs. For example, one of the people who translated our guided audio tracks, she went on to do her PhD looking at the resonance and dissonance between modern mindfulness practice and traditional Māori practice, sort of pre-colonial times, what they were doing that kind of paralleled. Joni Gordon is her name, and she presented on what she was doing earlier this year at a conference that was held, a mindfulness conference at AUT University. And it was very interesting to listen to some of her findings as she was going through this PhD. And she was saying that, things like time, for instance, time has been colonized by a Eurocentric worldview, where we see time as linear, whereas from a Māori perspective, and I think this is true for many Indigenous peoples, time is something far more holistic, and past, present, and future are all happening together at once. And so, that really shakes things up, because it's like, all these assumptions we bring in, they're just concepts, they're just assumptions. And I think that's been, so there's been all of this work that's kind of, Pawsbury Smile, I think, has in some way been a kind of springboard for, and it's taking on a life of its own, which is amazing. But the greatest thing about it too, I think, when, for me, engaging with Māori through this work, is not so much learning about Māori culture, and because, there's always a risk that you're going to appropriate, could be really inappropriate. So it's not so much about that, but it's that opportunity to have that mirror, put up in front of your own face, to see your own biases and your own prejudices and your own kind of, the extent to which European cultural values dominate Western societies, and other voices get oppressed through that. So, having that opportunity to be challenged and to really find more sensitive ways of working, and the absolute fundamental importance of building relationships in order to, to really do this well.
Wow, that's so interesting. I'd love to hear more about that talk as well. That sounds amazing. So Grant, just before we finish, is there any last messages that you want to share with our audience that's watching today? We have people pretty much, and I don't know how many countries, but a lot of people around the world. So what message would you just like to end with today?
I think, you know, if you're delivering mindfulness in schools, whether it's to children or whether it's to teachers, you know, make sure you're doing it in a way where you're prepared to have your assumptions challenged. You know, I think that's really hugely important. And don't be afraid to experiment and be bold. I mean, you know, we have to operate with integrity, obviously. But I think the challenges we face in the world today require us to really be bold, to be really progressive, and to just do things a little bit differently to maybe how they've been done in the past. And so one of the assumptions, for instance, I held when I first started this work was that the only people I wanted running this program in schools were long-term mindfulness practitioners.
Right.
And I found actually they weren't the best necessarily at delivering this in schools, whereas teachers seem to do a really good job, even if they didn't have years of mindfulness practice experience. If you can get those two things coming together, well, you're on to gold, right? But that's few and far between.
Yeah.
But what we realize is that actually we really need to honor the training that school teachers have. You know, they know how to speak to children, and they really know how to bring complex themes to life in a child-centered way. And so, you know, we took that step of training teachers, and that's been, I think, for the most part, really transformative for teachers as well as students, because they get a lot of benefit through going through this process. So that's the thing, I think. Be prepared to let your assumptions around all of this stuff be challenged, including the worldview, you know, you bring to it. Really consider that, particularly if you're, you know, Western cultures with very individualistic worldviews. Consider that actually where this whole mindfulness tradition has come from has been out of cultures that have had far more holistic worldviews, you know, where, you know, the river, the local river and the local mountain, as well as your ancestors, they're all a part of this moment. It's not just me going at it alone. So really, really starting to unpack and explore that and being bold with it. I think that's maybe the key thing.
Wonderful, great advice. Thank you so much for sharing all about the research and the way that the program developed, and how the community has you know, taken it on and it's spread. I think it's going to be a very inspiring message for people that are trying to just start off and bring or develop programs in their countries or their worlds. And what you said about assumptions, I think you know, that's probably going to be my biggest takeaway from your talk is thinking about that. So thank you, Grant, for sharing all your wisdom and your knowledge with us here today. And just like to remind everyone again, you can go onto the link at Mindfulness Education New Zealand and see the resources there and how to contact Grant if you want to get in touch with him. So thank you again so much for sharing with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Helen.
Great.